All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us this evening for our program. My name is Julia Black, and I am the Events and Marketing Coordinator for the Indianapolis Propylaeum. The Propylaeum was founded in 1888 by renowned suffragette and activist May Wright Sewell as a place where women and women's groups could meet and share ideas. We carry on that tradition today through our mission as the place that connects and celebrates women. Our mission focus is women's leadership, arts and culture, and historic preservation. Our program this evening features Meg Storrow. Meg is a registered landscape architect and a certified planner engaged in community, park, and multimodal transportation planning with a passion for landscape stewardship. She is a big picture person who develops strategies that enable communities to transform their public spaces into destination places by celebrating and enhancing their cultural landscape legacy and by creating connections through a balanced transportation system. Meg has worked on registering multiple properties on the National Register, including the Indianapolis Historic Park and Boulevard National Register listing, the Fort Wayne Historic Park and Boulevard listing, and the Columbus, Indiana National Historic Landmarks Theme Study. She and her co-principal and husband, John Kinsella, founded Storrow Kinsella Associates, an award-winning planning, urban design, and landscape firm focused on strategies, places, and connection in the public realm. Please remember to keep your microphone muted throughout the duration of our program tonight. Once Meg has finished, we will have time for a Q&A session at the end. For any questions, please type them into the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen throughout the program. And without further ado, Meg Storrow.
Thank you, Julia. I'm really honored to be here tonight, and in preparing the presentation, I have taken some liberties with the subject matter to include some, I hope, challenging and inspiring ideas of how the Ralston legacy has catapulted us into the future and what that could bring. So I'm going to share my screen here for a second, and I'm glad to answer questions at the end of the meeting or go back through any of the slides, but perhaps what I'll do is sort of share my thoughts, and then we can have a dialogue and discussion to see what you think, if that makes sense. Okay. So this is a great image of the core of our City of Indianapolis downtown, looking south approximately from the library, and hidden behind the tower in the center is Monument Circle, and its sculpture that is slightly hidden. Well, I guess actually it is hidden. I'm going to show with my cursor here. Here is the monument here. Let me go, let's see, I have to figure out how to advance this here. Let's see, maybe I'll just go down. Wait, I'm sorry, I'm having, hold on just a second. I have sort of, maybe there, okay. So what I thought I would talk about tonight is starting with the 1821 plan, co-developed actually by Alexander Ralston, is the progression of three big ideas for Indianapolis from a city planning and landscape architecture development viewpoint, and that's, you know, really just my perspective. Let's see. So Indianapolis today is the 15th most populous city in the country. And it's hard to remember that, but largely that's because of our expanded land mass from Unico. We have almost 1 million people in the highlighted square here on your screen, which is showing the orange. The orange areas are the metropolitan urbanized areas in the city as identified by the Indianapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization. And I've taken the liberty to show the interstate system and how it intersects, and the greenway and park system, which is how many people between those two linear systems, that's how many people experience the city. It's kind of interesting when you look at the city today to realize that indigenous peoples were in this area at least back to 10,000 BC. That's an amazing legacy that is buried, and we're not going to talk about that tonight. I'm really starting with the early 1800s when the state of Indiana was admitted to the Union. In 1816, that happened, and then 1818, the Delaware tribe relinquished their tribal lands. And not too long after that, Indianapolis was founded as a planned city for the new state of Indiana. The blue square in the middle here is approximately that mile square area of the original plat that was designed or laid out by Alexander Ralston and Elias Fordham. That's a little fuzzy, sorry about that. So this is the first big idea for the way Indianapolis would grow. It was a mile gridded plat with 4 diagonal streets near the confluence of the White River and Fall Creek. And for those of you who live in Indianapolis, the squiggly line to the bottom right is the Pogues Run. It is in the mile square, although largely in underground pipes at this point. So Alexander Ralston has the notoriety of being a surveyor and engineer who had previously worked with Pierre L'Enfant on Washington, D.C. And he and Elias Fordham, who was younger, both from immigrated to the United States, were hired to design the layout of the new city. I did try to do some research on Fordham, and there's not too much available. He apparently wrote a book, but not too much about Indianapolis. However, the plan was inspired by the plan for DC with a central circle, which we now call Monument Circle, with 4 radiating avenues bisecting the street grid. This is a really great plat map of that period, an 1821 plat map that shows really in more detail some of the core ideas that L'Enfant and Fordham Ralston and Fordham were exploring and laying out. They identified the Indiana State House to the west. Here, I can show that on my screen here. Here's Monument Circle, which was really originally going to be the governor's mansion, and as we now know is our monument in the heart of the city, Soldiers and Sailors Monument. And down here on the right-hand side to the east of the monument was the platted location of the courthouse, and then further was the city hall. This it shows the University Park here, but that first opening image we had showed the larger Veterans Memorial Mall north of the courthouse, and that has extended the character that we know today, as well as the interstate system. So fast forward about, I don't know, 70 years or so, this blue square still the mile square. But the city had grown and the platted limits were about a 50 square mile, 42 square mile area. And Indianapolis was competing internationally with other cities and was inspired by the City Beautiful movement from the Chicago World's Fair. And they, an initial group that became the Chamber of Commerce, which is of note because the Chamber of Commerce is still providing this same leadership today, hired George Kessler. And he developed this park and boulevard system, and you can see that the radiating diagonal streets were extended from that mile square through that whole expanded plat of the city. The city was rapidly growing. And the park and boulevard system, George Kessler was doing a lot of these plans around the Midwest, as was Olmsted, what's his name? Charles Olmsted. Frederick Law Olmsted, the founder of Central Park, was doing similar plans. Kessler created in some ways, the suburbanization of the city, but also the transportation system, and created a legacy of open space that we're now using for our greenway system in the city. The green here is existing parks that were in place when he did his plan. And the yellow, and this is Riverside Park up here. Here's Crown Hill Cemetery. And the yellow was expanding that parkway system to create a transportation and pleasure drive network around the city. So the big idea there is some of these images. This is showing the Veterans Memorial Mall, again looking towards the Chase Tower, and you can see the monument here to the right. The core open space of our city, and it's interesting how powerful this is when you're in it. But as a downtown resident, I don't go there very often. It's kind of interesting. It feels off limits to me. Kessler's classic boulevard system or parkway system. Does anybody know what the difference is between a parkway and a boulevard? I'll open it up for any comments. Okay, so a parkway is general, or as defined by Kessler, was a variable open space drive that had maybe a formal alley of trees on one side, but on the other side generally bordered a creek or a stream that had a variable open space system, which created this wonderful, going back to that map for a minute, that wonderful riverine transportation system or pleasure drive system that we now use for much of our mobility around the city. Also, many beautiful bridges were built and designed. The streams were, in Kessler's time, transformed from open sewers to assets in the community. And we're still working on that today with the big dig that we're going through to separate the CSOs. So it's a long time work in progress. But out of that, he created these open spaces, one of which is the foundation for the White River State Park. Shown here is one of the vital connectors between downtown and the White River over the canal. And even though it is modernist and contemporary in design. It's actually the land and its system is on the National Register as part of the Park and Boulevard System National Register nomination. The Indianapolis Park and Boulevard System, which includes this view here in the Canal Walk, all part of the historic register nomination, does include a lot of these new contemporary landscapes because they were in the, they're just developed in different time periods, but still realize the original Kessler plan. And when you think about these landscapes were built back in the late 1990s, 2000s, that's 100 years after Kessler did his plan. But that's the kind of legacy that we are talking about tonight for the foundation plan, which was the Ralston plan. Fast forward a few years, and the cultural trail has identified another whole layer of open space and connectivity. Based on that Kessler plan, it extended out into the county, but in downtown, utilized the wide boulevards and streets that were designed by or laid out by the Ralston plan. And the reason we could take a lane of traffic from those wide streets and devote it to bike ped use was because Ralston was envisioning, many lanes of traffic, and probably lanes of trees, but it was very revolutionary when the cultural trail was developed to actually remove a lane of traffic and devote it to a separated two-way urban greenway system. So the next big idea or potential big idea is the Indianapolis Inner Loop Vision Plan. And now I am morphing over to my Rethink 6570 Coalition role as design chair for the coalition as we start to think about, which was galvanized by the North Split project, we start to think about how the interstate system has really expanded and also separated downtown from its larger community. So thinking back for a moment to that overall plan of the overall county, that's a big square of 1 million people. The Ralston plan is shown in yellow on this sketch here. And then the interstate system came in the 70s and kind of created a new barrier or definition of downtown. This backward C here for all of us who live here, this is 65, and then it goes north to Chicago, and 70 is going east and west. And we're one of the few cities in fact, maybe as far as I know, maybe the only city that has an intersection of two major north-south, east-west interstates in a downtown. It's very, very unusual. But as you can see, it expands that sense of downtown because the interstate, in addition to connecting the through interstate traffic, has created a barrier between the neighborhoods and downtown, the adjacent neighborhoods to downtown. The other thing that we need to keep in mind is because we're continually educating ourselves and listening to our neighbors and residents, but here you can see the interstate system and how it was and it's overlaid on a red line map, which was those people or those neighborhoods that were impacted by discriminatory lending practices. You can see that the downtown white area was largely exempted from that because it was mostly at that time office and commercial. There were some, Lockerbie and Chatham Arch, but they were fairly small areas. And even then, that like this pink area here is Chatham Arch, here is Lockerbie, here's Fountain, Fletcher Place and Fountain Square and the MLK neighborhoods. But you can see that the redlining was furthered by the divisiveness of the interstate. And that today is also driving some of these ideas for how we can reconnect the neighborhoods with downtown and restore the sense of the historic nature of our community. So the Rethink Coalition, and this is kind of an early sketch of our ideas, but the idea is to try to think of a different way of moving the through traffic through downtown. And what we're proposing right now, and that has been studied, is to recess the interstate. And the purple areas on the map are potential areas of new development and new district, which will also potentially revolutionize the adjacent underutilized land. It's potentially a transformative concept. We actually had a meeting today on Rethink where some of us on the committee were wondering, are we transformative enough? And we heard from our consultant group that is working with us, it's an international engineering group. They said, this is totally transformative, not only because of the concepts, but because you're working with two interstates, you have a historic downtown, you still have some of the redlined aspects and impacts on these impacted neighborhoods. You have initiatives by the health complex and the university complex to revitalize their areas. All that going on with a huge financial investment by the country in rethinking these interstate systems and how they can be redone to perhaps undo some of those old wrongs that impacted so many of our disadvantaged neighbors. So I know I'm getting a little into the weeds here, but it's important for you to understand that building on the Ralston principles, building on the Kessler principles, thinking about the future of our city, it's no longer good enough to just think about moving automobiles, moving truck traffic. We have to think about, traffic performance, safety performance and construction, but we also have to think about quality of life. We have to think about connectivity, pedestrian safety, environmental justice, and what those possibilities are. So the recessed option that we're looking at is creating basically a trench for the interstate to travel in. Now this is, definitely a contrast from the Ralston era of horse and buggy. We're now dealing with intelligent vehicles that can almost run by themselves in these interstate systems. And how can we make those do their function, but how can we restore the city? The way we can do it is separate that through traffic with our local traffic and provide more of a Kessler model of parkways and boulevards for our local traffic that can also create development opportunity in that real estate left over by a shrunken footprint from the interstate. And this sketch shows, maybe there's more caps or bridges over the interstate. It can have landscaped edges. And in some cases, we can add new boulevards that will serve new development. Yeah, and the most important part is parallel urban greenway systems like the cultural trail that can follow that inverted C of downtown to create better connectivity, in addition to transit and other mechanisms. This is a picture from Boston, the Big Dig, and I know everyone a few years ago thought it was a big boondoggle financially. But now nobody talks about that because the project is such a huge, huge success and impact on downtown Boston. It's brought people back. It's created outdoor spaces for gathering and festivals and just enjoying being outside. And the Indianapolis MPO asked us about the recessed interstate concept and said, will it have the same kind of transformative impact that the Big Dig had on Boston? And we think it will. And so if you can imagine our downtown being alive like this, and it already is, in many ways, many of those diagonal corridors, Mass Ave and Virginia Avenue, even to some extent Indiana Avenue, have been revitalized, but the car is still dominant. And the more we can get into the greenway systems and the transit systems to allow our spaces downtown to be people-oriented and walkable, the more we can knit the neighborhoods back together and create gathering spaces for all. So I think I'm been kind of quicker than I thought I would be, but maybe we can have a good conversation. The key takeaways from the inner loop vision plan is thinking back on the values of Ralston, thinking back about the values of the Kessler plan. It's really about quality of life. And our city has a great foundation, planning foundation for the vision that's been developed over the years. We've allowed our engineers and agencies to be siloed to some extent. I should have explained that Kessler, in addition to being a landscape architect, was also an engineer, and he was when he was hired by the city, he served as both the Department of Public Works and the Department of Parks together, because at that time it was viewed as one investment to create quality of life. And I think that's what we really need to get back to as we move forward in our visioning and remembering our historic roots in city planning. So that was kind of quick, well, maybe a little bit quicker, but I bet we have a lot of discussion we can talk about. And I'll stop sharing, or we could, what do you think, Julia? Should I go through this, take questions and we can go through the slides if we need to, or what would be
up to you. I think, yeah, if you want to leave the slides up for a couple minutes, then if people have questions, you can kind of flip through the slides. One question Ruth asked in the chat, she said, the slides appear to be from a book. What is the book?
Oh, on the recessed interstate? These slides at the end or the beginning? Which slides?
Let's see. Ruth, can you put in the chat or come off mute and say which slides you're referring to?
I can't see the chat right now. Let me see. Oh, here it is. I see. How does the recess?
She said the recessed.
Okay. Yeah, there is a lot of this, not this image here, but many of these images are on the Rethink 6570 website. And if you look at what we could probably go there because we're on Zoom, but there's a presentation that I pulled some of these slides from that the Rethink committee has been working on.
Provide a link. Can you provide a link?
I could provide a link in the chat here.
Yeah, do you want to drop the link in the chat? I was gonna say I could try and do it too, but I'm not sure I would know the correct.
Yep. Let me go get that while we're looking at these questions. Okay.
While you're doing that, we had another question. Matt, he asked, how does the recessed interstate idea mesh with the enormous ongoing construction of 6570?
Is that that's a really good question. Oh boy. Okay, we're opening up the can of worms now.
Yes. What's going on?
So let's see, let's go back to the map here. I could probably bring up more information, but the North Split is really a project that goes out to rural, basically to the west on 70, goes to approximately Alabama, to the east, and then down to Washington Street. So it's largely viewed that the North Split project will not be impacted greatly by any of the recessed interstate concepts. We've designed it right now, or conceptually designed it to basically transition from the Alabama Street or maybe even College to a recessed footprint, and then from Washington Street and the remaining segments. On the east side, it's more complicated than just the North Split project. It's also complicated by existing railroads, which are largely controlled by Amtrak and CSX, actually CSX more than Amtrak. So those are larger issues that will take probably another 10 or 15 years to resolve. On the railroad, there is a lot of interest in relocating the freight rail out of the city because there's an outer belt, and that's entirely a potential, but it would take huge, it's a huge potential. And with the new transportation funding bill, maybe possibly more likely than it ever has been. And it would have to be a parallel effort with the Rethink Coalition. So I'm not sure if I'm answering Matt's question totally, but we basically, the North Split, we agreed with INDOT that the transition, yes, we may have to tear down or transition some pieces of the North Split, but generally the elevated flyway at the North Split would remain in place.
Okay.
The reality, it's a $300 million project. Hard to tear down. It's going to be there for another 50 years.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Meg. We have another question. Lorraine, she was wondering if you could explain a bit further the difference between a parkway and a boulevard again.
Okay. The way I think about it the way my shorthand thinking of it is the bulwarks on a castle. So you think about the rectilinear nature of a castle wall, which is the bulwarks, and boulevard comes from that word. And let's go back to the Kessler plan here. Let's see. So it doesn't really illustrate it too well. I should probably highlight it, but he has his parkways, which are along the rivers here. But 38th Street, and I think it's Emerson, and on the south side it's Southern, and then it's Tibbs Avenue on the west, were all designed and platted as boulevards, which means they didn't have the variable open space, but it had a cross section of a nice wide pleasure drive, which was curbed and paved. It had a tree lawn, like a 12, 15-foot wide tree lawn with big trees planned for them, like sycamore or red oak. Then it had a sidewalk, and then it had 2 more rows of trees. And it was overall a very large, I think 120-foot right of way. In most cases, the city's taken out the trees and dedicated it to travel lanes, but that's because there was space in the boulevards to be able to put those additional travel lanes. So it's kind of ironic that the boulevards were there to create connections between the parkways in that circular, or, circling the city. And now they're being used that way, but they don't have the quality of life features, I guess you might say, that give them more meaning and impact and being an asset to the neighborhoods.
What about the parkways?
Yeah, the parkways are still, some pieces of them are just beautiful. I know that most of you maybe live along or near those parkways. Fall Creek, unfortunately, is one of those. Most people think of it as sort of a interstate in some ways, like Binford. But every time I drive it, I look at those remaining red oak trees that are so fragile. And every time you go by, you see that another car has hit one, or they should be treated like the most valuable of monuments because they're living. And they're still creating a sense of parkway, even though it's being used as a transportation highway.
Yeah.
My
Oh,
view.
I love that. Okay, Matt has another question, and he wants to know, what's your opinion of the conversion of downtown one-way streets to two-way, including Delaware in front of the Propylaeum?
Absolutely.
Oh, it's such a great plan. Devil's in the details. But think of what Central Avenue was before. It was a one-way street. And in maybe 5 years ago, was it, that they converted it to two-way, and it's just changed everything for the residences along that street. The traffic is slower. The trees seem more green. You can see people walking on the sidewalks. The parked cars offer a buffer to the traveling car for the people on sidewalks. It's been a big improvement. Now, I know that with my Mass Have hat on, I'm worried about the detail of design for what they're going to be doing downtown, because Central had great bones. And in some ways they're, Delaware in front of the Propylaeum has great bones too. So I think you're in pretty good shape, but where there isn't a lot of fabric left of the older structures, it's very easy to say trees aren't necessary or that separation for the sidewalk from the curb isn't necessary. So I think we all have to keep our eyes on it. But overall, it's a really, really good initiative and will help create more porosity, what I call transportation porosity, which is better, slower traffic, but you actually move more people because you're moving them not just in cars, but in bikes and walking and transit. And so you're actually moving more people. It's just not, they're not in their single occupancy vehicle. So I think it'll be great. We just have to all keep vigilant about the design details and stay on top of it.
Yeah. All right. Well, unless I see another question come through, that seems to be all of our questions. Meg, did you have anything else that you wanted to add before we close out?
Well, I think it's an exciting time for us that live downtown, work downtown, and have, the stakeholders like the Propylium invested in downtown. We all need to be cognizant, be educated about the opportunities like this. And I hope that you will reach out to me or to Marjorie or any of the folks, working on these issues to figure out how you can get engaged. There are many opportunities, and of course you could spend your whole life doing it, but then again, why not? That's what is needed is civic engagement, and those folks that care about the city, the more they can understand the foundations and planning principles that are the core of how we were laid out and extend that as we move forward, I think we have a great future. And I'm very excited about it.
Well, thank you so much, Meg, for sharing your knowledge with us and being with us here this evening. Thank you all for joining the call, and we really hope that we can that you all join us for our upcoming Historic Neighborhoods of Indianapolis program, which will take place on Wednesday, September 28th at 7. It'll be on Zoom, and it'll be presented by Kent Shute on New Harmony, Indiana. So stay tuned for all that information, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.